When you think of Roman entertainment, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Huge gladiators, right? Swords clashing, the Colosseum crowd roaring. We've all seen the movies. But what if I told you that was just the opening act? The warm-up for a full day of spectacle? The Romans had a thirst for amusement that went way beyond a simple duel. They came up with forms of entertainment so strange, so elaborate, and sometimes so shockingly brutal that they make a one-on-one fight to the death look tame. History has mostly forgotten these other games, overshadowed by the iconic gladiator, but the reality was far wilder than any movie has ever dared to show. We're about to look past the gladiator and reveal the forgotten world of Rome's most surprising spectacles. We're talking about everything from forests magically popping up on the Colosseum floor to full-scale naval battles in a flooded arena. This isn't the history you learned in school. This is what the Romans really did for fun. And trust me, it's gonna get weird. Before the gladiators even stepped onto the sand, the Roman Day of Games kicked off with something designed to show off the sheer power of the empire. It was called the Venatio, the beast hunt. And in Rome, nothing was ever simple. This wasn't just a few guys chasing a wild boar. This was a state-sponsored, systematic slaughter on an industrial scale. The Venationes were the ultimate display of Rome's dominion over nature itself. Emperors would spend a fortune to import the most exotic and terrifying creatures from every corner of the world. Lions from Africa, tigers from Asia, bears from the forests of the Balkans, and rhinos from Nubia. But they didn't stop there. They brought in crocodiles, hippos, elephants, ostriches, and even giraffes, purely for the spectacle. Picture this. The sun rises over the Colosseum, and the crowd of 50,000 is electric. Suddenly, from trapdoors hidden in the arena floor, a forest begins to rise up. Trees, rocks, and hills, hoisted by a complex system of pulleys, turn the sandy floor into a hunting ground. Then, the animals are released. Not just one or two, but hundreds, sometimes thousands. During the opening games of the Colosseum in 80 AD, the historian Suetonius tells us that around 9,000 animals were killed. Emperor Trajan, celebrating a victory, held games that lasted for 120 days and saw more than 11,000 animals slaughtered. These weren't just chaotic free-for-alls. They were choreographed shows. You had the bestiarii, who were usually criminals or prisoners of war thrown to the beasts with no real way to defend themselves. This was just a form of public execution. But then you had the venatores, the pro-hunters. These guys were skilled specialists, like gladiators, who trained to fight and kill specific animals. And they were admired for their courage and skill. The Romans loved novelty. They'd pit animals against each other in bizarre fights. A bear versus a python, a lion against a tiger, an elephant against a rhino. Sometimes, they even trained animals to perform tricks before being slaughtered, adding a layer of cruel irony to the whole thing. It wasn't always ferocious beasts, either. Romans would display gentle animals like deer, only to have them hunted down by predators right in front of the crowd. The logistics alone are mind-boggling. Capturing the animals, the brutal transport that many didn't survive, the immense cost. It was all a flex of the emperor's wealth and the empire's reach. When a Roman citizen saw a giraffe from sub-Saharan Africa get killed in the heart of Rome, they weren't just watching a blood sport. They were watching political propaganda. The message was clear and brutal. The entire world, including its most powerful beasts, belongs to Rome. And for the citizens, it was just the morning's entertainment. The day was just getting started. As the morning hunts ended and the smell of blood filled the air, the respectable upper classes would often dip out for lunch. But for the tens of thousands who stayed, the midday show was about to begin. This is where things took a turn for the truly grim. It was time for the noxi, the public executions. But this was no simple affair. This was death as performance art. One of the preferred methods was called damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Criminals, prisoners, and during times of persecution, Christians were thrown into the arena to be torn apart by starved lions, bears, and wild dogs. People would be tied to stakes, or as the historian Tacitus described, wrapped in animal skins to provoke the animals. A fate he said was used against Christians under Nero. What's really twisted, though, is how they turned these executions into elaborate mythological plays, forcing the condemned to play the lead role in their own death. These were real-life snuff versions of classic Greek and Roman myths, and the details that have been passed down are stomach-churning. Imagine a man convicted of a crime. He wouldn't just be executed. He'd be cast as the mythical figure Icarus, fitted with wax wings, hoisted to the top of the arena, and then dropped from a great height to his death, a gruesome reenactment of the boy who flew too close to the sundae. Another favorite was the myth of Orpheus, the musician who could charm animals with his lyre. A criminal would be dressed as Orpheus, given a lyre, and placed in the middle of a beautiful stage set designed to look like a forest. And then, instead of charming the animals, a starved bear would be released and would maul Orpheus to death. The poet Martial dryly noted that this was the one part of the show that didn't follow the legend. The creative cruelty was off the charts. They'd reenact the story of Mucius Scaevola, a Roman hero who thrust his hand into fire to prove his bravery, by forcing a criminal to do the same. If he refused, he'd be covered in a flammable tunic and set ablaze. Perhaps most disturbing are the accounts from ancient writers of the myth of Pasiphae being staged, where a female prisoner was assaulted by an animal for the crowd's entertainment. While modern historians debate whether these accounts were literal or just exaggerated for effect, the fact that they were written down at all is horrifying. Why do all this? For the Romans, it was a twisted moral lesson. By forcing criminals to die as mythical figures, the state was reinforcing a kind of cosmic justice. The person's humanity was stripped away, and their final moments were turned into a state-sanctioned story. It was a terrifying warning to anyone who dared defy Roman law, and for everyone else, it was a free and thrilling show. We're just scratching the surface of Rome's forgotten entertainments. If you're finding this dive into the dark side of history as fascinating as I am, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's next, because believe it or not, things are about to get even bigger. You think the Colosseum is impressive? Now, imagine it filled with water. Millions of gallons of it, deep enough to float actual warships. Then, imagine those ships, crewed by thousands of condemned men, fighting a full-scale battle to the death. This was the Naumachia, the mock naval battle, and it was arguably the most spectacular and deadly event the Romans ever staged. The very idea is staggering. The first massive Naumachia was put on by Julius Caesar in 46 BC, not in an amphitheater, but in a huge basin he had dug near the Tiber River. He had thousands of prisoners of war act as soldiers and rowers on real warships and reenact a historic naval battle. The scale was insane. 2,000 fighters and 4,000 rowers took part in that single event. Later emperors, who always had to one-up the last guy, took it even further. Emperor Claudius hosted the most epic one of all in 52 AD on a natural lake, pitting two fleets against each other with a mind-blowing 19,000 combatants. This is where the prisoners supposedly shouted the famous line, "We who are about to die salute you." These weren't sham fights. They were death matches, where one side was expected to be wiped out. But the most mind-bending shows were the ones held inside the amphitheaters. So, could they actually flood the Colosseum? Ancient sources do mention aquatic events happening there right after it opened. For this to happen, the entire wooden floor of the arena would be removed, and a complex system of aqueducts and drains would rapidly fill and empty the space. However, modern scholars are still debating exactly what was possible. Given the space and engineering challenges, the huge naval battles with thousands of men likely took place in the special basins. The Colosseum probably hosted smaller, but no less deadly, aquatic displays and reenactments. Still, the fact remains. They could flood the arena for an afternoon show, which is just incredible. The Naumachia represents the absolute peak of Roman spectacle. It combined unbelievable engineering, huge expense, and a complete disregard for human life, all for entertainment. It was a statement that the emperor could not only conquer lands, but could bend nature to his will. He could make a sea where there was none. It was the ultimate weapon of mass distraction. While gladiators are the enduring image of Roman fun, their popularity was absolutely dwarfed by another sport. If gladiatorial combat was a blockbuster movie, chariot racing was the national obsession. The place to be wasn't the Colosseum, but the Circus Maximus, a colossal stadium that could hold over 150,000 people, more than 3 times the Colosseum. Some estimates go as high as 250,000. It was the biggest sporting arena in the world and the heart of Roman social life. Unlike the gladiator games, which happened maybe a dozen times a year, the races were far more frequent. On race day, the city would basically shut down. The writer Juvenal famously coined the phrase, bread and circuses, and the circuses he was talking about were, first and foremost, the chariot races. What made it so addictive was the faction system. There were four main teams: the Reds, Whites, Blues, and Greens. And these were not just teams. They were massive organizations with stables, trainers, and legions of fanatical followers. Everyone in Rome, from the emperor down to the poorest guy in the city, had a favorite color. Supporting a team was like a religion. People wore their team's colors and bet huge sums of money on the races. This passion often boiled over into full-blown riots. The rivalry between the Blues and the Greens was legendary and could bring entire cities to a halt. Even emperors got caught up in it. Caligula was such a die-hard Green supporter that he reportedly planned to make his favorite horse, Incitatus, a government official. And the drivers? They were the biggest celebrities in the Roman world. Most started as slaves, but a great charioteer could win unbelievable fame and fortune. One of the most famous, Gaius Apuleius Diocles, had a 24-year career. By the time he retired, his career earnings were nearly 36 million sesterces. By some calculations, that would make him the highest-paid athlete in all of human history, with a fortune equal to billions of dollars today. The races themselves were pure chaotic danger. 12 chariots would race 7 laps around the track. The most dangerous spots were the tight turns at each end, where crashes called shipwrecks were common and absolutely brutal. Drivers wrapped the reins around their waists for control, which was also incredibly risky. If they crashed, they could be dragged to their death. That's why every driver carried a sharp knife, a faux, to try and cut themselves free. Many weren't fast enough. One legendary driver named Scorpus won over 2,000 races, but was killed in a crash when he was just 27. Chariot racing had it all: speed, danger, celebrity, and a tribal loyalty that energized the whole city. It was way more than a distraction. For 1,000 years, it was a fundamental part of being Roman. When we think of Roman theater, we might picture serious, stuffy plays. And yeah, that existed, but it wasn't what the average person was lining up to see. The most popular show in town was something much more raw, raunchy, and shockingly violent: the mime. Now, forget the silent performer in an invisible box. Roman mime was the exact opposite. It was a loud, spoken variety show, full of slapstick sketches about adultery, scams, and making fun of authority. What made it so different? First, the performers didn't wear masks, which allowed for way more expressive and crude comedy. Second, and this was a huge deal at the time, mimes had female performers on stage. In a society where respectable women were kept out of public life, an actress, or mima, was seen as scandalous. The word was basically code for prostitute. Some festivals were famous for featuring nude actresses on stage. But here's where it gets truly horrifying, where entertainment blurs completely with arena-style brutality. The plots of these comedies often ended with a character's death. And sometimes, for a spectacular finale, the actor would be secretly switched with a condemned criminal who was then actually executed live on stage. Just think about that. You're in the audience, watching a silly comedy, laughing at the jokes. The play reaches its climax, where the main character gets caught and is sentenced to be burned alive. As he's being tied to the stake, there's a bit of stagecraft, a moment of misdirection, and the actor is swapped with a real prisoner. The crowd's laughter would then turn to cheers, as the man was actually set on fire, his real death serving as the play's grand finale. Historians confirm this happened. While it was likely a rare shock tactic rather than a nightly event, the fact that it happened at all is chilling. It brought the realism of the midday executions right into the theater, merging fiction with state-sanctioned murder. The line between play acting and punishment wasn't just blurred. It was completely erased for the crowd's amusement. So, the next time you picture Roman entertainment, look past the lone gladiator. See the bigger picture. See the thousands of animals slaughtered in a pop-up forest. See criminals dying as characters from myths. See an arena filled with water for a naval battle. Hear the roar of 150,000 fans as their chariot team rounds the turn. And picture an audience laughing at a comedy, knowing the death scene at the end might just be real. What the Romans did for fun wasn't just sport. It was an expression of their entire worldview. It was about power, social control, and mass distraction on an unimaginable scale. These spectacles reinforced the emperor's might, the empire's reach, and the brutal enforcement of Roman law. It's easy for us to be horrified by the cruelty, but it also makes you think about what our own modern spectacles say about us. The Romans just had fewer filters. They understood that the greatest show on earth often required a potent mix of bread and circuses. Even back then, some people were appalled. The writer Seneca condemned the games, asking, "What pleasure can it be to a man of refinement when a weak man is torn apart by an extremely powerful animal?" It's a question that shows that even 2,000 years ago, some people were watching the crowd as much as the show and wondering about the true nature of entertainment. What was the most surprising Roman entertainment you learned about today? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear what shocked you the most. And if you want to keep exploring the most incredible corners of history, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell for more.